So, Leute, herzlich willkommen zu 99 zu 1. Welcome to 99 zu 1. Today we have an English episode, but before that I want to say one thing to our German listeners. So I'm going to switch back to German. Heute ist erstmal meine letzte Folge hier. Vielleicht habt ihr bemerkt, dass ich ein bisschen weniger oft schon da war und das ist, weil ich zurzeit einfach viel lernen muss. Ich werde bald Staatsexamen schreiben. Das heißt, bis dahin werde ich erstmal keine Interviews machen. Genau. But then after this short announcement, let's continue to our episode, to our interview and to our guest. So today we are talking about a topic that I feel is quite controversial. We are talking about the Holocaust, how it is seen in the Arab world and to the connections they have. And I feel that there are accusations on both sides with, for example, people saying Israel is committing a Holocaust or all Palestinians are anti-Semitic or that there is a new form of anti-Semitism which we should talk about. And I feel that it's necessary to talk about the topic in a productive way that doesn't operate with these kind of accusations. And also I felt, so how I got interested in the topic is that I actually read about one figure that I think is really prominent when talking about the topic, which is Amin al-Husseini. And I think he's a figure that is accused of anti-Semitism, and I have never read about him. So, and I read about him in an Antideutsche publication, which is like a part of the German left. They call themselves left, but they support Israel. Maybe for everybody who is not doesn't know the German discourse. So yes, that's actually how I got interested in the topic, and I think today we can bring some light in the discussion with our guest, and I'm very happy to have you here. Our guest is Gilbert Schkal. Welcome to
Hello,
99
hello
zu
Leia.
1. Yes.
Thank you very much. And well, I hope you'll be happy with your last interview.
I'm quite sure I will be, yeah. Also, what I say every time, that the topic we are talking about is a lot, so I think we won't be able to talk about everything that is important in this episode, because we only have, let's say, 1 hour. So we are going to talk about a book that you wrote, but first of all, I will introduce you to all of our listeners who maybe don't know you. You grew up in Lebanon and you worked as a researcher and as a lecturer in Beirut, Paris, and Berlin. And since 2007, you are professor of development studies and international relations at SOAS in London. And you wrote many books, so we are going to talk about one of those books. I also have it here. So that's the German edition. I don't know if you can see it. So the German edition is called Die Araber und der Holocaust, der arabisch-israelische Krieg der Geschichtsschreibung. And actually in English for this time, the translation is the same. So it's the Arabs and the Holocaust, the Arab-Israeli War of Narratives. But besides that, you also published a lot of other books that were translated into over 15 languages. So some of them are The Clash of Barbarism, The Making of the New World Disorders, Perilous Power, The Middle East and U.S. Foreign Policy, which you co-authored with Noam Chomsky. Then Marxism, Orientalism, Cosmopolitanism. That's actually the first book I read of you, which I also really liked. And then another book that you wrote is The People Want a Radical Exploration of the Arab Uprising and Morbid Symptoms, Relapse in the Arab Uprising. And next year, so in 2023, there will be a new book coming out, The New Cold War, the United States, Russia, and China from Kosovo to Ukraine. Yes, a lot of books, definitely also a lot that you can read. I also recommend, so as I said, the only book that I have read apart from The Arabs and the Holocaust is the one on Marxism, Orientalism, and cosmopolitanism, but I really recommend it to our readers. I really, really liked it. Yes. All right, did I forget anything with introducing you?
No, thank you very much. That's absolutely fine.
All right. And maybe to all new listeners who are not, who don't know our podcast yet, you can also ask questions in the live chat, and if they fit the conversation, I will ask them. Yes. All right. Then maybe let us jump right into the discussion. So actually, when I prepared the interview in our group chat of this podcast, Fabian, one of my colleagues, sent an article published by the German newspaper Der Tagesspiegel about this topic we are discussing today, so about the Palestinians and the Holocaust. And amongst other, this article referred to a study by the Israeli NGO Impact C, and that found out that the Holocaust is not mentioned in any school textbook in Palestine. So, and what this article did indirectly was implying that this was super outrageous, that Palestinian textbooks or school textbooks didn't mention the Holocaust at all. So one maybe provocative question I have is, why should Palestinians engage with the topic at all? Also, given the fact that the Holocaust obviously was not committed by them, but by Germany. And maybe a more general questions would be, why do you think the relation the Palestinians, or more general the Arab world, has with the Holocaust is a relevant topic to talk about?
To the question of whether the Palestinians should study the Holocaust or not, my answer is definitely yes, they should. If only because it is a key argument used by their oppressors in order to justify the oppression inflicted upon them. That is, as beside the general reason for everyone to study the Holocaust and to study other major crimes against humanity, like those perpetrated by colonialism in the global South, especially in Africa or also India and other places. The reason is that we must learn from history to fight any recurrence of such tragedies and such crimes. Now, the Palestinians, by the very fact that they are under Israeli occupation, are definitely much more exposed to the history of the Holocaust than anybody in Europe, for instance, right? So in Europe, maybe students study the Holocaust at the school at a certain time or in their studies, and maybe there are some things in the media, but the Palestinians are constantly exposed to this issue of the Holocaust, and most among them, the Palestinians who have Israeli citizenship, so who know the Hebrew language, they are exposed, like the whole Israeli society, to a constant flow of information and comment on the Holocaust. But even those who are under occupation are also in this condition. Now, you're absolutely right to say that the Palestinians are not responsible for the Holocaust. They have not committed the Holocaust, and therefore, to find it outrageous that they don't study the Holocaust, that is outrageous in itself. The fact of finding this outrageous, I find outrageous.
I think that's also very particular to the German situation. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, is this NGO that you mentioned, did it study how much the textbooks in Israel discuss the Nakba, how much they discuss what many Israeli historians called ethnic cleansing that happened in Palestine 1948? Do they discuss in the textbooks the occupation, the oppression that has been going on? If you just look at the territories occupied 1967, even if you forget what happened before, even that you have already several decades now of occupation, regarded as occupation by international law, by the global community, and yet that's carrying on with its daily list of people killed, of repression and the rest. So, I mean, what population can suffer decades of such oppression, of occupation, as we have seen, and so to come and to tell them, hey, you are not teaching the Holocaust in your textbook, and this is outrageous. This is what is outrageous. This is total ethnocentrism and colonial, mindset, believing that you are perfect and the others are barbarians. You are the civilized and others are barbarians. So that's very, very, very symptomatic. We are used to such discourses. But again, I get back to what I said at the beginning. I think it is very important for the Palestinians to know, to study the Holocaust because of what I said, and because I think a real understanding of the lessons of the Holocaust is a very powerful antidote to every kind of oppression, of discrimination, of racism, of ethnic cleansing, or whatever it is, which is exactly what the Palestinians are suffering. So studying the Holocaust is definitely something that is useful for the Palestinians, as it is useful for all humanity.
Yes. I also think that it's important to study the history, to know the history, and also to be able to debunk some of the arguments, because what I hear, and I think is an argument that Israel also brings up, is that Israel was a reaction to the Holocaust, so that the founding of the State of Israel was actually a reaction to the Holocaust. And I think if we do look into the history of Zionism, how Zionism began, when the ideas began to spread, I think it becomes clear pretty soon that it was actually, that this idea of a Jewish state actually was there before the Holocaust and even before the Nazi takeover in Germany. Yes. So for all of our listeners, I think if you are more interested in that, so in the history of Zionism, we also have another episode on that which you can listen to. But maybe we can also discuss this here. What do you think about this narrative that Israel was funded as a reaction to the Holocaust?
Well, of course, I mean, I think you are trying to point to the fact that the Zionist movement and the project of creating the State of Israel predated the Holocaust by many years. Actually, Zionism in its modern statist form, that is the political movement that is called Zionism, and that is defined by the objective of creating a Judenstaat, as the title of its founder, the manifesto of its founder, Theodor Herzl, was, and the Judenstaat, which is sometimes, or most, is officially translated in English as the Jewish state, although in English, I mean, in German, the Judenstaat is not exactly the same as the Jewish state. There's a nuance that disappeared here. Anyway, that is from the end of the 19th century, and the attempts at organizing settler colonial dispatches to Palestine started right at that period of history, from the late 19th century and the early 20th century. But the project was boosted by the fact that Britain seized Palestine after the First World War. As a result of First World War, Palestine before that was under Ottoman domination. That is what we call today Turkey, was the center of the Ottoman Empire. And Palestine was part of that. So the British took over Palestine and green-lighted the Zionist movement to develop their settler colonial movement in Palestine. Now, there is, I think, no possible discussion about the fact that the Nazi seizure of power, the power grab by the Nazis in 1933, was a major event that allowed the eventual creation of the Israeli state. That is, had the Nazis not come to power, if we judge by the conditions before that, before the Nazis come to power, you started having negative migration, negative Jewish migration from Palestine. That is, more people leaving Palestine, I mean Jewish people leaving Palestine, than people coming in. That is, large numbers of those who had gone to Palestine started leaving Palestine because they saw that the settler colonial enterprise was rejected by the local population, which is very, very natural.
Yeah. I didn't know that, but where did they migrate to? And were those the Jewish settlers who came there and then saw that they didn't like the project, or were they?
Many of the Jews coming from Europe to Palestine, because the Zionist movement explained to them that this will be the promised land, and the kind of things. Many, got shocked by what they discovered, seeing the local population reacting negatively and all that. So by the late 20s, you had clashes, and the situation got quite tense in Palestine. So you had more people leaving at that time. They would go to other lands of immigration. You know that overall there have been much more, Jews, European Jews who immigrate to North America than to Palestine. So that was ultimately the main. And then you had also South America. You had other places, but the Americas mainly would be for those fleeing Europe, fleeing persecution, or even migrating for economic reasons. Anyway. So before the Nazis come to power, there was no indication at all that the Zionists would be able to fulfill their project. However, with the coming of the Nazis to power, the conditions created by the Nazis, including the transfer of the German Jews to Palestine, organized by the Nazis and the Zionist movement. These are factors that boosted considerably the settler colonial enterprise, and later on, when you had the Holocaust, what is called the Holocaust, the Shoah as they call it in Hebrew, which means the catastrophe, that would be starting from 1941. Then, of course, the situation became very tragic with the genocide, the perpetration of the genocide. And after the war, you had a big mass of survivors of the Holocaust in Europe, and they were sent by the Europeans to Palestine. That's the Europeans, the Russians, the Americans didn't want to get them in or open their doors to them. They were sent to Palestine, and that's even the decision by the United Nations General Assembly in November 1947. At the time when this General Assembly was dominated by global North countries and the Soviet bloc, very few global South countries, the decision to approve the partition of Palestine between a Jewish state and an Arab state is a decision that was made with the purpose for the Western, for the victors of the Second World War, Western and the Soviet side, to send the survivors there. That's how they gave 55% of the land, according to the partition plan adopted by the UN. So the majority of the land was given to the so-called Jewish state, which at the time when you had only 1/3 of the population there who were Jewish, most of them freshly migrating from Europe. So the idea to give a larger territory than their proportion even was related to this calculation that the survivors of the Holocaust will be sent there. So yes, the Holocaust was a determining factor in the creation of the Israeli state. That doesn't mean that the project of the Israeli state was a reaction to the Holocaust. That's factually wrong. Yes, so that's what we can say about that.
Yeah. During what you said, more questions popped up in my head. So one of them would be, you mentioned a collaboration or let's say an organized transfer from Jewish people from Germany, or what then had been the Third Reich, to Israel, that was organized by Zionist organizations and the Nazis. And I wondered whether you could specify this only a little bit for our listeners.
Yes, I mean, when the Nazis seized power, and until 1941, until the Second World War, which starts in 1939, but the genocide, the systematic extermination, the systematic murder of the European Jews, that starts in 1941 in Russia, and then in the KZ, in the concentration camps. But until then, the Nazis were practicing what today we call ethnic cleansing. That is, making Germany Judenrein for the Nazis at that time until 1941 meant deportation of German Jews out of Germany. Yeah, that's how they understood Judenrein, Deutschland. Yeah, that's how they understood it at that time until the Holocaust. And therefore, they made an agreement with the Zionist movement, seeing a complementarity between, if you want, the goals and purposes. We want to get rid of the German Jews, and you want also the European Jews, all of them, to go to Palestine. So we can have a deal. That's how the only organization that was tolerated in Nazi Germany, other than the Nazi party itself and its groups, was the German Zionist organization. It was even allowed to carry on publishing its own publication. And so you had this cooperation, and you had an agreement signed in 1933, just a very short time after the Nazis came to power. They signed an agreement to Zionist movement that is called in Hebrew Ha'avara, which means the transfer agreement, through which they would collaborate in sending German Jews to Palestine. And the Nazis created conditions that forced German Jews to go to Palestine. How? Well, by deciding that German Jews, the only country to which they could take their belongings in the form of whatever they could buy in Germany, not money, but goods, machines, equipment, whatever. The only country where they could take that with them was Palestine, right? If they, for instance, wanted to go from Germany to America, forced German Jews, to go to Palestine, and that continued like this. This cooperation between the Nazis and the Zionists actually ended in 1941, of course, when the Nazis started the genocide.
Yeah. Also, what I find really interesting is I think somebody in the chat also wrote that what you just said was very interesting and that that person didn't know that. And I think on the other hand, if you look at the accusations that are made towards the Palestinian sides to have collaborated with the Nazi, especially with this figure I mentioned in the beginning, Amin al-Husseini, I think it's a very present allegation to say, but the Palestinians, they work together with the Nazis. So they also carry some, I'm not saying that's true, I'm just saying that these allegations exist.
No.
But so right. I wanted to...
Yeah. No, we need, of course, to understand one thing. In their mind, the Zionists who were doing that were fulfilling their own goal of taking Jews to Palestine. Ideology. Now, they had this convenience agreement with the Nazis, right? But of course, it doesn't mean that they were, for instance, they colluded in the Holocaust. That would be, of course, completely absurd. Now, the issue is, because of this whole idea of giving full priority to their project, which is the state of the Jews in Palestine, the Judenstaat in Palestine, the Zionists did not contribute to the campaign of Jewish organizations in the United States, in Britain, other countries, to open the doors of these countries. They were not interested, the Zionists were not interested in America opening its doors to the German and other European Jews, because the Zionists wanted them to go to Palestine. They didn't want them to go to America, right? And so here, again, you have a kind of convergence, because Hitler, Adolf Hitler, didn't want the German Jews or the Jews in general to go to America because they would be part of the anti-Nazi lobby in America, and he didn't want, to get enmity from the Americans at that point. So he much preferred to see them go to Palestine, where they wouldn't be a problem for him, for his regime and party. So that's what you had. Now, this is very well documented. There are some books which are controversial, like the works of Lenny Brenner, but there is a book that is not controversial. It's a very academic book by a Holocaust studies professor, Francis Nicosia, like the capital of Cyprus. And this book is called, can't remember the exact title, but something like Nazism and or Zionism and anti-Semitism or something like that in Nazi Germany. Anyhow, you can look at for the book under the author's title. It was published by Cambridge University Press in English. I'm not aware of a German translation. Maybe there is a German translation, but I wouldn't be very much surprised if there isn't.
I also wouldn't be surprised at all.
Yeah, these are quite embarrassing. Not only, I mean, it's very well documented. You have pictures and photos of, for instance, training camps created by the Nazis for the Zionist movement to train people to agriculture and other things that they would be practicing in Palestine, for instance. Yeah, you have a lot of pictures and all that. It's a very interesting book. It's the best book on the topic.
Yeah, that's also one interesting fact that
Zionism and anti-Semitism in Nazi Germany.
Someone
looked for the title and
two people wrote the title in the chat, so you can look that up if you want to. Also, you mentioned one fact that I find very interesting, that in your book you mentioned, or you look at the reaction within the Arab world to the Holocaust, to the Nazis, but also to Jewish immigration, to Palestine, to Zionism. And one of the currents you make out, so you discuss more or less that there are 4 political currents, and one of them that you make out is the Marxist current. And what I found really interesting is that you said that one shortcoming of that political current was also that they didn't engage in a political campaign to ask all of the other countries, so let's say the US, Britain, to open their borders for refugees. And I find it very interesting that also when we talk about the topic right now, and if you're not really invested in the topic, so if you haven't read a lot of books about it, it seems like logically, or also because it's maybe what, let's say, media or whatever tells you, that one of the only solutions really was to create a state in Palestine. Yes, and I think that that's also not very apparent in the discussion, at least the one I know from in Germany. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear things like the Arabs, even the Palestinians, but the Arabs is much worse, because the Arabs are much larger population. There are a group of populations than the Palestinians. When you say the Arabs, things like this or that, this is in itself, a kind of essentialization of a whole, of what, hundreds of millions of people, as if they were one block. It's like saying the Europeans think that the Holocaust is this or that. I mean, this is absurd, of course. So there are, among the Arabs, as among any other population, various political trends and currents, and they engage with all these, with this history. Even if you look at history and with the present, they engage with the issues of anti-Semitism, Nazism, and the rest differently, depending on their ideological and political orientation. Like anywhere, like in Germany. I mean, there is nothing called the Germans who has one opinion on everything. This is ridiculous, of course. And there are many more Arabs than Germans, of course. 4 more Arabs, 4 times more. So that's the issue. You have to look at various currents throughout history. And today, when you look at the Arab world, of course, it's not one monolithic bloc. Within each country, within everything, you have various political currents, and they have various attitudes. And it goes from what we may regard as far right to far left. So you have the whole political spectrum, and therefore views and ideas over the whole political spectrum, and they would differ depending on where people stand on this political spectrum.
Yeah. I also noticed that in this whole debate, which is happening in the common sense, that class is not central at all. So in the political debate that I know, they do exactly what you just described. So they talk about the Arabs or the Palestinians or also the Germans, as if class didn't play any role at all, and also as if there were no class interests at all. Yeah.
I mean, it's not only class because you I mean, you have political currents, and the same class may have several political currents. If you take the German working class, okay, if you look how the German workers vote, they are not voting one side. They vote across the spectrum. So it's more a matter of political currents. The issue of class comes forward when we're speaking of social struggles, when and you can analyze the views and saying this corresponds to this or that kind of class interest. That's a different matter, but it's not the class in itself that determines the positions of people. Hmm? They I mean, people, especially if you look at the workers and all that, you can't take it for granted that they have class consciousness.
Yes, obviously, then we
Class
wouldn't have to do a
Bewusstsein.
podcast like
Yeah.
this at all.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So it's not a matter of class, it's a matter of political opinions. That's why I'm saying you have to look at the political currents that you have. Now, of course, they will, I mean, they express different class views in some way, but the people how to say, adhering to this or that view are not adhering because of their class, but because of the kind of either education, milieu, environment, political influence they have been submitted to. And that's how we understand also how the far right can progress among even working class. From the United States, where they are voting today, to Germany, to anywhere, we have this problem of the rise of the far right. Yet again, one century after later, we have a new rise of the far right in a different form. But there is a lot in common between these two historical moments of rise of the far right. And yes, that's the issue here. There is a matter of political fight, political struggle, and political education, and it's important, therefore, yes, to do what you are doing, whatever modest means you have. That's very important, because those who dominate the media, yeah, they have their own agendas.
Yes.
Which are class agendas, granted.
Yes. I also think it doesn't make sense to only talk about class, because that would be super deterministic, like you just said. It would be to say, yes, the working class per se has this opinion and wants capitalism to fall down, which obviously is not true at all. So we already talked a bit about the political currencies and tendencies within, let's say, the Arab world, or also Palestine a bit. But one of the persons which is really singled out quite a lot, which I also mentioned one, is Amin al-Husseini, and he plays quite a big role in the propaganda war. And I wanted to ask you, so he does play this big role because people take him and say, this person was super anti-Semitic. He collaborated with the Nazis. He worked together with the Nazis. And as a consequence of that, they make that all the Palestinians, or that the Palestinian resistance in total, was anti-Semitic. So I wanted to ask you, what role did he actually play in the Palestinian struggle? How big of a person was he really? And also, maybe how important were the other political currencies in Palestine at that period?
Right. Look, we could say that if Amin al-Husseini had not existed, the Zionist movement would have invented him, because he has been so useful to the Zionist movement. When I worked on my book, and that's many years ago, I was struck by the disproportion between the interest in Amin al-Husseini in European languages and the interest in Amin al-Husseini in Arabic. Much less. I mean, you did at that time, you did a Google search of his name in Arabic, and you would get a very tiny portion of what you would get if you do the same in German, English, French, whichever European language. Why so? Because he was the preferred villain of the Zionist narrative. You know, the subtitle of my book is The Arab-Israeli War of Narratives, because like in every conflict, the Arab-Zionist conflict, a major dimension of it, even more than other conflicts, you have a major dimension here of the war of narratives. And so for the Zionist narrative, aside from the Holocaust, if you want the nexus between the Holocaust and Palestine is Amin al-Husseini. That's why I'm saying if he didn't exist, they would need to invent him, because that's how they turn Amin al-Husseini as a major figure in the Holocaust, and therefore the Palestinians as a whole become responsible for the Holocaust because of Amin al-Husseini. And therefore, that would justify in their narrative, the expropriation of the Palestinian people of their land. That's the kind of reasoning that you find, and of course, it's extremely flawed. I mean, this even reached really ridiculous proportions. And the late Peter Novick, also a Holocaust study a major figure, who died a few years ago. He was a professor at the University of Chicago. He noted in his book on the Holocaust in American memory at that time, he noted, he was the first to note that the Encyclopedia of the Holocaust, published by Yad Vashem, the Israeli memorial, in that encyclopedia, the second longest article, biographical article after Adolf Hitler, is Amin al-Husseini. Longer than Himmler, Goebbels, Eichmann, and you name them. I mean, this is grotesque, ridiculous.
This is really crazy.
Yeah, this guy played a ridiculous role in the Nazi machine, and actually he was not connected directly to the Holocaust at all, to the point that he himself tells in his autobiography that he was told by Himmler in the summer of 1943 about the ongoing genocide, but he definitely collaborated with the Nazis. There's absolutely no possible, dispute about that. This is historical fact, like what we said, like the historical fact of the cooperation between the Zionist movement and the German Zionists and the Nazis. He collaborated with the Nazis, contrarily to the Zionist movement, who stopped their collaboration in 1941. He started his collaboration in 1941 when he moved to Europe, and he spent his time until the end of the war between Berlin and Rome. So in collaborating with the two major European powers of the Axis, as it was called, the fascist Nazi axis of powers. And so his contribution was to address the Arabs and the Muslims with anti-Semitic propaganda, pro-Nazi propaganda. disguised or in an Islamic kind of presentation. And he tried his best to win over Muslims and Arabs to the Nazi cause, but he failed miserably. I mean, there were many more even Palestinians who fought with the British against the Nazis than the whatever. There are hardly any Palestinians, ridiculous numbers, who went over to the Nazi side. So that's it. But of course, that was enough to make him a kind of suddenly, as if he represented all the Palestinians, although most of them disagreed with his stance during the war, and attribute his positions to the whole Palestinian people, and that's a complete distortion of history. Again, not to mention the fact that he was a little clog in the Nazi machine, and definitely not a major figure. I haven't been to Yad Vashem, but those who visited can tell you also that when you enter, you have a huge section and portrait of Amin Husseini. Again, he is used as an alibi, a legitimation argument tool for the Zionists to cover for what they did to the Palestinian people, to try to kind of lay the blame for the Holocaust partly on the Palestinian, which is absolutely grotesque, historically speaking.
Yeah. So just to make that clear, because if I'm not mistaken, I also read that he was kind of the leader of the Palestinian struggle in the 1930s. So a question I had, if this really is the case, why was it like this? Was it because any other political fractions were not organized at all? Also because you just said that a lot of Palestinians disagreed with him. So a question I also have was, how did the general reaction of Palestinians towards Jewish migration, towards Zionist intents to settle Palestine look like at that time?
First of all, we have to keep in mind that he was raised to prominence by the British, and more specifically by the High Commissioner for Palestine, Herbert Samuel, who is a well-known Zionist. So a British Zionist was in charge of, running the colonial authority in Palestine, and that's the person who selected Amin Husseini at the ridiculous age of 26 to be the great Mufti of Palestine. He was, very young. He didn't have at all the theological training that you need for a major theological position, and he was given this position by Herbert Samuel. And for 10 years, for 15 years, he collaborated with the British. The British were funding him, funding the Muslim institution that he was heading. This carried on until 1936, when you had the big uprising in Palestine. You had a big uprising of the Palestinians, which was repressed very cruelly, very harshly, terribly. A lot of hanging, lynching, and all that, lots of executions by the British colonial authorities. That's when they broke with him. He broke with them because he started getting connected with the German embassy, with the Nazis. And he fled From Palestine, he went to Lebanon, then to Iraq, and then he ended up in 1941, as I said, in Berlin and Rome. He therefore, having been the great Mufti, the Grand Mufti of Palestine, which even the title was created by the British, by the way. Having had this title, he has been built as a major figure by the British themselves. And so he played on that chord a lot. Now, I said, of course, there were other currents, competitors or opponents of him in Palestine, but he was a big maneuverer. He managed to dominate, to impose his views to the detriment of others. Now, when he went to Berlin and Rome, he was not followed. There we have the archives and all that. You can see that even letters of some of the leaders of the national movement blaming him for that, explaining it's not our interest to go with the Germans or the Nazis, because after all, the real anti-colonial would understand that Germany and Italy were not better than France and Britain, even if Germany had few colonies at that time, you had Namibia and all that, you had in Africa, the Arabs knew very well that what Italian colonialism did in Libya, for instance, which is an Arab country. And so Amin Husseini himself knew that. He even knew about the transfer agreement. He knew that. And yet he was willing to collaborate with the Nazis. That was absolutely something that is, terrible. He was a very right-wing figure, so he could find connections with the Nazis. He had affinities with the Nazis. He espoused their anti-Semitism, not their whole ideology, like, their social views and the rest. That was not his business. But what he espoused was, their anti-Semitism, and of course anti-British and the rest. And yes, when the nationalist regime in Egypt came forward under Nasser, who became the most popular hero of the whole Arab people and the whole Palestinians, actually, he had to leave Cairo. He was in Cairo. He was refugee in Cairo, but the new regime didn't want him. They didn't want him, so he went to Lebanon. When the PLO was taken over by the Palestinian guerrilla, armed struggle organization, he stood against them. He didn't want to recognize the PLO. He believed that he was the only representative of the Palestinians. So he was a very discredited figure, actually. And if you look at that, there's hardly anyone who claim his legacy in the Arab world. You don't see anything called after him, for instance. You have a lot called after this or that of the historical figures, but not him. There is no street called after him. There's nothing. So the view, the idea that he embodies the Palestinians, if not the Arabs, if not the Muslims, because with Islamophobia now also is a very convenient argument. This is complete rubbish, to be frank.
Yeah. But still, I think that this is a pattern that we can see, or what we have just talked about, that in the case of Amin al-Husseini, it does make sense to say some of his points were anti-Semitic, I guess. But then I think that this is...
Of course. No, he was fully anti-Semitic, especially after 1941. When all his speeches and all that from Berlin and from Rome were really racist, anti-Semitic. It's not that he was anti-Zionist or whatever. No, it was anti-Jewish. So that's anti-Semitism, as it is called. That is, he was conveying the Nazi message. And that is, he was a hateful figure, I should say, a right-wing, deeply conservative and ultra even right person who naturally ended up collaborating with the Nazis.
So what I wanted to ask is that I think we see this pattern of accusations of other political leaders of being anti-Semitic. For example, you also mentioned Nasser. Or also, if we step in history a bit closer to the times we are living in now, I think it's a very common accusation to all of the Palestinian resistance to say it's anti-Semitic. So I think we don't have time to just look at each accusation and debunk it, so to say. But I wanted to ask you, especially also with this point or talking point that there is a new form of anti-Semitism which we should care about. I think that's also a very specific point in the German discussion, or which I see in the German discussions. So we also have, for example, when a demonstration happens after Gaza is bombed, there are journalists saying, this demonstration is so anti-Semitic, we have a new form of anti-Semitism, and then they call for all Palestinians or people supporting who are supporting the Palestinian cause to be kicked out of Germany. So I wanted to ask you whether you can talk a bit about this accusation of all Palestinian resistance being anti-Semitic.
Sure. You know, we must be used to this argument. The Ukrainians are anti-Russians, according to Russia, right? Those who oppose the United States are labeled anti-Americans. No one is against just another state or whatever when for racial reasons, if they are victims of oppression practiced by that. That's a major difference. For instance, a German anti-Semite, someone who has anti-Semitic views, who's a German who lives in Germany, that's extremely grave, extremely serious. Because on the one hand, this person has absolutely no reason to hold any views hostile to the Jews, except their own racist mindset, right? And when you take into account that Germany perpetrated the genocide of the Jews, that makes it even much more serious, right? But when a Palestinian is facing a state that calls itself Jewish, that even adopted a law saying Israel is only the state of the Jews, which means that even this minority of the Israeli citizens who are Arabs, Palestinians, who hold Israeli citizenship, they are not regarded as part of those to whom the state belongs. It's not a state of all its citizens. Actually, the formula "state of all its citizens" is a demand of the movements, and especially among Arabs, that you have them fighting against the oppression and discrimination within the state of Israel. So this is very different. It's like I won't blame a Ukrainian today if they express anti-Russian views because of what they are suffering. I would tell them, don't mix or you should make a distinction between the Russian state and Russians in general, even though nothing indicates that. I mean, you have even indication that until now, this may change. A majority of the Russian population still supports Vladimir Putin. This is shrinking, but there are a lot of Russians who are against what is happening in their name, right? So we shouldn't make generalization, but yet I understand, and the same should be said about Palestinians who suffer from this terrible oppression. What do you want them to be ultra, supernatural beings with very high moralities while they are suffering all this kind of oppression? Why isn't that required from other people on earth? No, this is again a trick by the Zionist movement, by the pro-Zionist, by the pro-Israel movement, to discredit any criticism of the state of Israel. And this trick is rejected, by the way, by a lot of Jewish people and intellectuals, including a lot of Israelis. You can find online even statements like statements against, for instance, the International Holocaust Remembrance Association definition of anti-Semitism, which in some way equates anti-Semitism with the critique of the state of Israel. And this is rejected by hundreds of Jewish intellectuals in petitions sent to the French parliament, to this or that, that you can find online. So this is a trick, and we shouldn't accept that trick. At the same time, and this is important, of course, it is important to, I'm speaking here as an Arab. I believe it's my role, like the role of any intellectual, to educate, to fight against any generalizations, to keep people making the distinction between Zionists and Jews. It's not the same, and that was, a very classical distinction in the heyday of even Arab nationalism, Nasser and the rest. So to make this distinction is important, and I think actually a majority of the Palestinians for sure, and even for the Arabs in general, know this distinction, because they know a lot of well-known Jewish figures who are critical of Zionism. Just to give you an example, you mentioned my friend Noam Chomsky. Okay, so everybody knows Noam Chomsky. But Noam Chomsky is probably certainly one of the most well-known intellectuals in the world, and everybody knows that he's Jewish, and yet he's very critical of the Israeli state, and so this distinction is there. But for instance, if you listen to the way people speak, if you take the Palestinians in Israel, they would say the Jews when speaking of the others. What do you want to say? They can't say the Israelis because they have the Israeli citizenship. So the distinction is Arabs and Jews. And that's how they call it. So there, it's not the same as speaking of the Jews in general in Germany or France or anything like that. So we have to take everything in context, understand the context, and then discuss what has to be discussed. But what you are referring to are precisely taking things completely out of context with some kind of abstract moral hardstick, which they never apply to themselves, always to the other side. And it so happened that the other sides are the oppressed, and they stand on the side of the oppressor. And that's the key issue.
Yeah. I think that which we talked about this whole conversations is very important, that we shouldn't make generalizations, not make any generalizations about the Arabs, the Palestinians, the Jewish people. Also, one thing that I notice in the German discourse a lot is that it's always, Germany has committed the Holocaust, and I do think obviously the Holocaust was committed in the German territory, but then again, if you look at the German population, there was a lot of communist or socialist resistance and also religious resistance in the beginning. And I feel that's never mentioned in the, let's say, state discourse. So I really think that's important. But maybe looking at the time, we are already quite over 1 hour. I wanted to ask you, I mean, right now you already said a lot of things which you think should be done to address this matter in a productive way. But I wanted to ask you whether you have any thoughts on how this topic can be addressed in a good way, and maybe also having in mind that we are a German podcast, what do you think is necessary for the German discourse to advance in a good way?
Right. Yes, absolutely. This is a very important issue. I mean, it's very important that Germany reflects critically over its past and assumes the responsibility of Germany in the genocide and all that. I mean, that's obviously something that is very important. However, the issue is what lessons you draw from history. When you see the German state funding, arming a state that is oppressing other people, is this the right lessons to be drawn from the Holocaust? Arming the Israeli state to oppress, to wage wars against its neighbors and all that. This is the key problem here. You have had a kind of even identification of the German right with the Israeli state, and it was a complete reversal of things. The tendency to see the Israeli state as, as Herzl himself put it in his manifesto in the Judenstaat. He says at some point, we will build the outpost of civilization against barbarism, which is the most classical colonial discourse. And so you have an identification today, unlike what you had in the 1930s. Today, the far right tends to identify with the Israeli state, not because they like the Jews, but they see the Israeli state as the outpost of whiteness, if you want, as they see it. It's a complete reversal of perspective, and so today you have the most far right government in the history of Israel that is being formed now as we speak. Netanyahu again has come, but this time Netanyahu, who is the head of a party that the other wing of the Zionist movement, which was the labor wing, they used to call the Likud, the party of Netanyahu, they used to describe them as fascist. Ben Gurion famously compared Begin, Menachem Begin, was the key leader of the Likud in the 70s, to Hitler. Even that you had, So these people have been now at the helm of the Israeli state for decades. During that time, they have been overwhelmingly the dominant in Israeli politics. They only lost power a few years within these, since they won the election in 1977 until now. This whole period, they have been completely dominant and shifting more and more to the right, even from what they were, And now this is this is one of the most, if not the most, actually far-right government anywhere.
It's also funny because I just one quick thought. I saw a video on a press conference here in Germany, and one journalist asked a German state official what she had to say to the fact that in Israel right now there will be emerging the most right-wing government Israel has ever had. And the state official just said, I refuse this. I refuse you saying that it's a right-wing government. Yeah.
If that's not right-wing, what is right-wing?
Yeah, I also don't know.
No, this is. I mean, you have to realize that this is. I mean, this is even the AfD is less far right than those with whom Netanyahu now is creating his new government, who are open supremacist, open racist, not without any, any kind of disguise. They are very openly like this. So this is the result of the evolution of such a state. The Marxist scholar Maxime Rodinson died many years ago, and who was of Jewish origin. He wrote it very clearly. He said, a state built under the conditions that the Israeli state was built is structurally doomed to, drift more and more into racism and that kind of things. And that's, we are seeing it. The verdict of history is very clear. This state that was built at the beginning in 1948, when it came out, it projected itself, and part of the European left believed that the Israeli state was, some kind of socialist paradise or something like that. And now it has shifted to the far, far, far right. And this is a dynamics that was built in, if you want, the very conception of the state, a state based on force, on the conquer of others' land, on discrimination, on racism, in a word, And so to believe that the lessons of the Holocaust for Germany mean to support the state, that means not understanding anything about the real lessons of the Holocaust. The real lessons of the Holocaust should lead you to the contrary, to be against any form of oppression, any form of discrimination, any form of racism, anti-Semitism, or whatever it is anywhere, and that is the real lesson of the Holocaust. And that's what Germany should have drawn as a lesson primarily.
Yeah, I mean, we work hard on distributing this opinion, or also, I don't know how many people watch our podcast who are not already, let's say, who say that Israel is an occupation or oppresses Palestinian people. So, but I don't know if we actually reach those people, because I feel that we are a podcast that actually does a lot on the topic of Israel and Palestine. But still, I think your words are so absolutely true that that's a thing that should be done in Germany, really, to grasp the situation. And yes. I think with that, if you don't have any other thing you want to say, I'm really grateful that you came here. I also think that we talked about really interesting things that also a lot of the audience, I read a few comments that said, wow, that's interesting. I haven't heard that before. So I think this was a really good episode. Yes, so I thank you for being here, for being our guest.
Thank you. Very best wishes to you for whatever you'll be doing after working on the radio.
Yes, thank you. Okay, and then to all of our listeners, thanks for being here, thanks for listening, and I hope you have a good evening. Maybe I will come by in other episodes, but I will just not be doing any big interviews anymore. All right, then, goodbye, have a nice evening.
Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Wenn euch dieses Video gefallen hat, klickt auf Like, abonniert den Kanal und vergesst nicht das Glöckchen zu drücken, damit ihr benachrichtigt werdet, wenn wir neuen Content droppen.
Außerdem solltet ihr uns überall folgen, wo wir verfügbar sind. Das ist Facebook, Instagram, Twitter und Twitch. Und wenn wir irgendwelche Ankündigungen machen oder Posts, dann shared, was das Zeug hält. Gebt uns all eure Liebe.
Wir haben mittlerweile ziemlich signifikante Kosten. Wenn ihr es euch irgendwie leisten könnt, unterstützt uns doch auf Patreon. Dann kommt ihr auch in den Genuss verschiedener Vorteile, wie zum Beispiel Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community oder Zugang zu den ultrageheimen Patreon-Episoden, die wir dort posten. Außerdem könnt ihr uns natürlich auch über PayPal Spenden zukommen lassen.
Außerdem haben wir mittlerweile einen eigenen Online-Shop. Das heißt, wenn ihr euch immer noch fragt, was ihr euren Lieben zu Weihnachten, Ostern oder sonst wie schenken könnt, geht dorthin und kauft duftes Merch.
Alle Links dazu hier in der Beschreibung oder auch auf unserer Webseite 99zu1.de.
Vielen Dank fürs Dabeisein, danke für die Unterstützung und wir sehen uns in diesem Theater.